Africa, the birthplace of humanity, the cradle of the human family. Africa, home of the world's first civilizations, endowed with a vast store of natural resources. Africa, target of centuries of European greed and plunder. In the 15th century, Africa's glory, stability, and progress was brutally disrupted by Europe's war against Africa, marked by pillage, exploitation, and racism. The transatlantic enslavement of Africans and colonial and neo-colonial rule upended Africa. Communities were attacked through physical violence and psychic terror. Families were torn apart by coercion and rape. Languages were silenced. African ways of being were deemed inferior and targeted for erasure, and European ways of being, deemed to be superior, were put in their place.
Some of you dived into the waters to save yourselves. Some of you were sick and were thrown overboard and died. And some of you died on the ship and were just tossed as garbage into the sea. You had lives, it had worth and meaning. You had families, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, uncles and aunties who never saw you again. We remember you. We have come to bring you home, to let you know we are here, we have been waiting, that you may find rest.
It has been more than 600 years. 600 years since the Portuguese, with the authorization and blessing of the Roman Catholic Church, and, over time, with the support of banks, insurers, and other businesses, launched the largest forced movement of human beings in recorded history, igniting centuries of enslavement, colonization, and a brutal legacy of global anti-Blackness. A legacy that has resulted in profound, unmeasured and untreated wounds that weigh heavily on the bodies, minds, and spirits of Africans and people of African descent all around the world today. These wounds can be seen in systems that exclude, inequalities that endure, truths that are suppressed, minds that are manipulated, and the persistence of the poisonous lie of white superiority and black inferiority. A spirit of anti-Blackness affects all black people, wherever we find ourselves in the world, no matter what country and no matter what language we speak. Global anti-Blackness affects us all, and the need for healing and reparations is urgent across global Africa. In response to this need, in March 2025, Africans from the continent and the global African diaspora came together near Accra, Ghana, for a groundbreaking summit aimed at healing these wounds, once and for all.
So the Global Circle has been working for several years trying to unite African-descended people from across the diaspora to fight for our individual and collective reparations. So a few years ago, we had the first ever reparations summit on the continent of Africa. We had the Accra Summit, and this was the first time that the African Union actually publicly endorsed the issue of reparations.
Once we formed the Global Circle, we led with a historic Accra Summit on reparations in Accra, Ghana in August of 2022, which resulted in the Accra Declaration.
Accra won. One of the things that kept bothering me was that there seemed to be a lot of silence about the pain between the continent and those in diaspora. and that we can't just look outwardly at Europeans, but we have to do our own healing work amongst ourselves. We can't really control what the Europeans are going to do, whether or not the United States government or European governments are ever going to do what's right when it comes to making repair. But what we can control is how we as Black people, as African people, heal our relationships with each other, and we heal our relationships with ourselves.
The summit brought together existing local, national, and international initiatives to establish a sustainable global infrastructure for healing.
This summit is about taking the learnings, the things that were developed from the Summit 1 in Accra. Now we are looking at building practical tools for implementing that change, implementing healing and reparations.
This was Accra Summit 2, centering healing across global Africa. And this is the story of the beginning of the long overdue journey toward complete healing for Africans and people of African descent worldwide.
Have people understand that not only is reparations about a check or about compensation, it is ultimately about our healing.
The question is asked or has been raised why we are centering healing as an essential part of reparations.
Accra Summit 2, Centering Healing, was the brainchild of the Global Circle for Reparations and Healing. Established in 2021, the Global Circle brought together advocates and activists to advance an agenda for reparations and healing for Africans and people of African descent around the world. Accra Summit 2 built on the work of the Global Circle's Accra Summit 1, Advancing Justice, held in August 2022, which brought together advocates and activists from across global Africa to develop the first ever global agenda for reparations and healing.
We're here at the Vatican, in Vatican City at the Pontifical Council on Culture.
And we were advised that we would have met with the Secretary for Culture, except that he was not here.
To presenting them with a document that lays out our findings on their history in relationship to transatlantic slave trade, lays out what we can, through data, show is the legacy in lived conditions of African children, our people Africans around the world, and it also lays out what we think the claim should be for them to address that history and that legacy.
So I think what is so important and, dare I say, revolutionary about the Global Circle is that it is bringing together all different types of reparations activists. It is multidisciplinary, meaning that you have some people who believe that reparations comes through healing. You have others who are working on financial repair. You have others that are working around issues of the legal system. So I think it is important that we realize reparations cannot come in any one form, and that it is necessary to bring people who are working on this from all of the different angles that Black people have been harmed because of the legacy of slavery.
Accra Summit 1 highlighted, for the first time, the importance of healing to the international reparations agenda. According to the Accra 1 Declaration, transatlantic enslavement, colonialism, apartheid, and the genocide against Africans and people of African descent were a direct assault on the bodies, minds, and spirits of African people that resulted in profound injuries that went unmeasured and untreated.
Oh, Mama Africa, who stitched your side? Your sons on strange fields, your daughters denied. Cotton and cane under a foreign sun.
Organized by the Global Circle, in collaboration with Justice and Repair and the African Union's Diaspora Division, Accra Summit 2, Centering Healing, built on the momentum of Accra Summit 1 and focused attention squarely, for the first time ever on the international stage, on the importance of healing from the legacies of enslavement and colonialism and global anti-Blackness.
The reason why we are here is for us to be able to operationalize the theme of the African Union for this year, which is justice for Africa and the people of African descent.
The thing about healing, though, it's ours to do. We don't need to go outside of ourselves or to ask of other people. Healing is our work, and we have everything we need to do that work. And that is why we're centering reparations and healing.
I turn down this authority in recognition of your own journeys, your own experiences, your own knowledge, your own blood and sweat, your own scars, your gray hairs. Kata!
Summit participants, children of Africa, came from countries across the world, including Nigeria, South Africa, Guinea-Bissau, Ghana, the Netherlands, Portugal, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Colombia, Haiti, the United States. We came together to collectively correct our miseducation and deepen our understanding of where we stand as Africans and people of African descent in the world today. How we got here, how we have been relentlessly assaulted and left wounded. The countless cultural values, tools, and resources that have enabled us to survive, resist, and practice resilience over the course of centuries. And most importantly, what we must do now to finally and fully lay down this heavy burden and heal.
I think we've gone beyond the situation of expecting them to really give us a great deal of financial support towards this, but we need to at least have an understanding that there is work that we need to do among ourselves to heal the damage around our enslavement and or our colonialization.
Over the course of 3 intense, informative, and inspiring days at the Big Blue Resort in Nyanyanor village near Accra, the Centering Healing Summit asked crucial questions that demanded time and complex analysis. In fact, summit participants raised many more questions than we answered.
I incite deeper questions, better questions, to elicit better answers and solutions.
But each question and each answer seeking to put the pieces together was a major step in our collective journey toward healing.
History, so we can unearth the information. So I look into the historians to help guide us in figuring out a way to create the details for magnitude, methods, aims, mechanisms, and manifestation.
There were no easy answers. These were energizing, difficult, but necessary conversations. Because healing demands questioning, truth-telling, and understanding.
Sana el alma. Traemos la pena antigua en cuencos de barro, la lluvia de ayer todavía pesan los hombros. Caminamos descalzos sobre la tierra que nos mira buscando el remedio que crece entre las piedras. Lava el dolor con el agua de la memoria.
There is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to find his own partner and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
We began by looking at Africa before the domination by Europeans. The kingdoms, Africa's critical economic, social, and political role in the ancient world, and enslavement as it was practiced in Africa before the Europeans. We asked who was served, who is served by the European narrative about Africa and Africans in general, and by the European narrative about Africa's involvement in the so-called slave trade. How does global Africa confront this history honestly, through African eyes, using our truth, our narrative, as the foundation for healing?
I ask the question, who were the Africans selling prior to the Portuguese arrival?
When you talk about African complicity, what you're talking about is African kingdoms that have been captured and that have been subjugated by Europeans and were forced to pay a subjugation tax. And that subjugation tax was a tax in enslaved in human beings, in Africans. And if you didn't have that subjugation, if they weren't defeated, then you found that those nations were actually resisting. And they resisted up until the point that they also were subjugated.
The key things I want to highlight, the differences between slavery before the transatlantic slave trade and the transatlantic slave trade, the differences between the two. One had to do with the transatlantic slave trade, where a farmer in our family went farming and never came back and was taken up with a long story that we need to die. Three things. One important difference is that it was not and still not inherited. If somebody was captured as a slave and then they had a child, the child was not a slave. Unlike the transatlantic slave trade practice. The second is that there was high potential for freedom. When you are captured, you go, they take you there, initially, they say, well, hey, you were captured, you're a slave. You go to the farm every day to farm for us, and you do X, Y, and Z. But after a short while, you become actually a member of the part of the family. And the third is that it was a lot less brutal.
The former admitted they were domestic slaves, in a sense, that they had some basic rights, which sometimes be integrated into the mainstream political leadership, and that there have been enormous instances of chiefs and clan heads who were Parisians.
We often engage in the dialogue about how we were sold. But because of what was forced upon African people in any one of our families, there were people on both sides of that trade. And I think that's really where the healing begins, is in acknowledging that.
In the end, by the adoption of themes of forgiveness, justice, honesty, we will begin to answer the questions: how did we get here? What role did slavery play? Who did what to do? What is the role of individuals, of communities, of societies? How much is the past shaping current events?
The summit participants confronted squarely the difficult questions of the extent to which some Africans may have been involved, or perceived to be involved, in the capture and transport of fellow Africans, and how Europeans took advantage of existing local conflicts with their military arsenals to coerce African leaders into participating in the transatlantic enslavement of Africans.
Now, I happen to believe that that's a crucial question that has to be answered, and I believe that Africans are not responsible for the slave trade. This was initiated by Europeans, nor were they the beneficiaries.
The summit concluded that, contrary to the popular European narrative, the trafficking of Africans was not initiated by Africans, and Africans were not the primary beneficiaries of this horrific system, and that such complicity as there might have been was a forced complicity. The transatlantic trafficking of Africans was fueled by a cruel European agenda that caused severe damage to all Africans that urgently requires healing.
Africa has suffered and has been a victim as much as its diaspora. Our economies are divided because of colonization. Our borders are split. The conflicts that we face, the migration, the poverty, the lack of opportunity can be traced back. Africans, even population decrease and economic impact can be traced back to all of what we are discussing. But if we want to heal, we need to come together.
This is a great gathering of people that are doing great work in all of those areas to bring that together to come up with more refined clarity on what healing looks like and what it's going to take to achieve it.
Participants then looked boldly at how global Africa was wounded by the destruction of kingdoms, the transatlantic enslavement of African people, colonial and post-colonial rule, and by the creation and persistence of the lie of white superiority and black inferiority. Participants grappled with the wide range of challenges that emerged from this woundedness. Chief among them, questions of identity, differences and commonalities among Africans and people of African descent.
Being darker skinned, my first experience was people making fun and pointing out the fact that I was dark skinned. So for me, I can remember as I was 4 and that being an insult that's thrown around, but it also was some comedy Black culture to say, get your black ass over here, or you're just putting black in front of whatever and making that automatically gets it pejorative. So for me, that was the first way that I realized, okay, you're all around all black people, like, you're black.
You're not gonna tell me that's something you have to do. But you see, it was Big Mama did it. And if it was okay for Big Mama, it's okay for me. But you see, this is why we need to know and understand so we can examine the behavior and determine whether I'm going to pass that on to another generation.
His trajectory, which is what I was kind of trying to do. And then he said, oh, it's really weird because I did a DNA test and he's mixed, so his mother is white, his father was from Jamaica. And he said, I was really surprised because on my mother's side, I saw everything I thought I would see, Irish, Swedish, and everything else. And then on my father's side, Ghana was coming up and I was expecting Jamaica. So I said to him, the Jamaicans are dead, they were genocided. The people in Jamaica are Africans who were there. And he got it.
These challenges continue to undermine our individual and communal health and well-being, and our ability to work together in unity and harmony. Only through the process of healing can we effectively address these challenges.
Before the Anglo-Saxons, en masse, really our presence is 20th century, en masse. And so we haven't developed kind of like an African British or a quote-unquote Black British epistemology, or what, because our sense of who we are comes from all over the world. And we bring that into our UK experience. But the one thing, the word that I was offering is Pan-Africanism or Pan-African unity, because that is what has bonded us, and that is what has enabled us to connect with each other across kind of divides of continents or even languages or ethnicities that we carry. It has been a Pan-African identity. So at the same time as us experiencing or being survivors of ethnocide, we are also ethnogenesis. We are recreating ourselves.
By defining ourselves, we are doing the work of healing. In the communal space that was created at the summit, we recognized, valued, and celebrated our many differences, as well as our many commonalities, as Africans and people of African descent.
You've asked me to trust you. You say, come, friend, let's learn the ropes together. But you're wearing the garment of a hangman. How could I possibly trust you with those ropes? You've asked me to journey with you, yet you've refused to walk in my shoes. How can you say you share my pain when you cannot feel my heartbeat?
When I say that this is an interactive conversation, I'm expecting everyone here to roll up their sleeves and to begin doing the work of creating this infrastructure. We have gathered and listened and taken notes and will present a proposal of what we would like to offer, but this is not mine, it's not Kwesi's, it's ours.
In the communal space that was created at the summit, we reached consensus that because of our conditioning, we see each other through the lens of the European lie about who we are. In order to heal, we must see each other through each other's eyes, in the fullness of our humanity. And in order to do that, we must become reacquainted with ourselves as Africans and learn to trust each other.
Trust across Africa and global Africa is broken. That's our problem statement.
What we're talking about is not solving the entire thing, but to make sure that we're improving in our connection, right? So one thing that I was thinking about, because they talk a lot about in movement science, you can't scale what you can't measure and evaluate that works.
And I think this concept that was brought up earlier, because I'm sitting next to her, about the polarity and the complementarian, I think the idea and notion and what you're saying is the fact that something is either bad or it's good. It's evil or, I guess, I don't know, it's God. But this concept of trust, even as you're explaining it to us, is already a loaded question. Because I don't necessarily have to trust that you're going to do something good to know you well enough and holistically enough to not fear your behavior. And I think that is really what we need to not do, not fear, being in close proximity to each other. And then Miss Shelley said something about reconnection and what are the barriers to the connection. And I don't think trust in the way that you're about to ask us the question. And so I think as we move through the presentation, if we just remember that English in general is our enemy.
Which meant that when I met people that looked like me, you didn't have to earn my trust. I just gave it to you.
Well, I don't have any reason not to trust you.
Yeah.
It's not something you earn, it's something you give. But in the last 4 or 5 years, what I have experienced is that I have given that trust indiscriminately. And then when people don't behave the way I expect them to, then I don't trust them. And part of what I'm learning is to even question, why is my trust conditioned on people behaving the way I expect them to, when they are different people?
The thought that's coming to me in terms of the question, for the room, has anybody ever been in love? Show of hands, hold them high. Are you in love currently? Come on. I hope everybody here has at least felt that feeling of being in love. And the way that I've understood and come to understand love through my relationship with my wife, which I think shapes my view on trust, is the ability to be fully exposed and vulnerable without fear of that exposed vulnerability being used against you. And I think the way that relates to our interconnected, international, global challenge is that we aren't exposed enough to each other to reduce or remove the fear of it being used against us, right? And that's ultimately because of the perceptions that are exported, the engagements that we have in limited fashion, without enough exposure, we aren't. So while I've been here, when I've greeted brothers from different countries around the world, the first thing I do is find an agreement on the dap. And for those that don't know, dap is the handshake that is unique to us, dignity and pride, right? And so some will do the standard, but I'll hold on to it. I'll interlock the thumb, I'll bring it to the fingers, and then you'll figure the variation out of the continental agreement on the shake and the greeting.
I remember when I was a kid and I would go places with my dad and my dad would do the nod, right? And it didn't matter what white space we were in. If he saw a black person in here, he did the nod. And I remember one time I was like, Dad, you know them? And this is when I learned, right? Because he was like, no, I don't know him. I don't need to know him. And it was then that I got the understanding from a young child that when we're out here in this wilderness, you're gonna make a connection. And that nod is saying, I see you and I'm with you. Right, the Montgomery Brawl that we had. Y'all remember that glorious day?
Physical manifestation of what I feel like happens on a metaphysical level. I didn't always drive. I didn't start driving until I was 27. And so I rode the bus for a long time And I would remember how some girls, they had lots of kids and they don't know how to hold on yet. And so when the bus stops without notice, they jerk, and all of the women sitting at the front automatically, they don't know these kids, but they automatically have an instinct within them that goes to reach and grab the kids. And these are the most ratchet, I mean, they're not girls that have been trained, you know, like they probably weren't mothered well themselves, but inside of them, you couldn't destroy this instinctual trust that they had, that I have the capacity to grab this child and save them, and also the fact that it doesn't matter if I ask you permission to put my hands on your child. And so I would like in the vocabulary for us to think about what instinctually is in us that we didn't lose, because maybe I don't trust you, but I trust God, and if I can come to the consensus that there is a value system that's in me, like the DNA that never was destroyed, and I can somehow tap into that so that I can tap into seeing that in you, or trust at least the God or the value of God in you. And I think that we need to make space for that vocabulary.
And the question becomes, for me, can I give you grace to correct and then trust again? And then the other part of it, that's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is, can I trust myself enough to be on the receiving end of having trust violated and not let that totally upend my foundation and the work that I'm doing?
Think about trust. It makes me think about the song that Brother Kwame is shared with us about the crab, right? And I think he made an analogy for as African Americans, even as having this hard exterior, this hard shell. And when I think about trust, part of me was in conflict because so much of our, as far as my generation and younger than me, our identity is wrapped up in mistrust. You guys talk about the head nods, and I regularly have a conversation with my wife about not getting the head nod in Portland. Because Portland, you know, I was explaining to someone else yesterday how the attitude in Portland, if you imagine going to an interview, you got 5 people in there, and there's 2 black people in the interview, I'm no longer thinking about those other 3 people. My enemy, or the person I feel like I'm competing against, is the other black person in the room. And so I think in Portland, that's always at play. You know, a lot of us young folks, we wear the mean mug. We wear this harder exterior to kind of try to protect ourselves from, I guess, what happens when we don't have trust. And so I think the words that came to mind for me were vulnerability, empathy, I think I heard someone talk about, and then I just think letting go.
And I think when there's a shared standard, when there's shared values that feel very fundamental, that's that big T trust, right? I trust everybody in this room enough to do the things that the big T trust kind of has us sharing, that we share. And then the little T trust are the ways that I think we exhibit unhealed behaviors, right? And then we maybe can't trust each other to be kind, right? But your big T trust allowed you to go down to the man who had insulted you because you knew you shared something big, right? Even though there was mean words to you. But your big T trust said, I trust enough to have a conversation.
To find out, or to deal with how we cope with healed, or more importantly, unhealed behavior. What is the basic underlying something that will allow us to function in a healed way in our relationship with each other? Trust is a part of that. Now, I gotta tell you that within the political movement of Pan-Africanism, the problem is that how we treat each other and how we do settle political differences is tremendously unhealed political behavior.
The summit's central question was, how does global Africa heal? Summit participants identified essential pathways to healing, including truth-telling and confronting the unhealed behaviors that have been conditioned within us as a result of centuries of global anti-Blackness, and replacing them with healed behaviors. Healthy responses developed as a result of African-centered healing methods designed to undo the effects of anti-Blackness. It was agreed that a crucial pathway to healing is the building of trust between and amongst ourselves. The conversation was not all kumbaya. There were differences of opinion and perspectives, but these did not lead to differences in alignment, commitment, or connection to one another. We modeled healed behavior in the communal space fostered in the summit.
In order to get to healing, we have to listen to one another and develop that trust with one another. We've done activities that have really helped us to unpack certain traumas and discuss what healed and unhealed behaviors look like in our community. And reparations is all about repair. It's not simply about money, which is, important, but in order to help us, move forward and be able to understand the impact of what Black people across the diaspora have experienced, we have to also really think about the healing aspect.
The message from Accra Summit 2, centering healing, is urgent. Healing is not optional, it is essential. It is the pathway to our unity and our empowerment.
We then hope that globally, this is an agenda that will have a momentum, and ultimately we'll be having concrete elements of healing being a concrete part of justice and reparation. So we are not just talking about compensation, we are not just talking about the legal elements of it, but we are talking about these internal and external aspects of healing.
And we have to understand that this globally, as global Africans, this started a long time before us. We have been handed our charge now in this day, in this moment, to do our part in changing the trajectory of our children, of future generations, not necessarily spending a whole lot of time looking at what is past, but how the past has impacted the present, how it has in many ways impacted our lives. Chattel enslavement, colonization, being robbed of the riches, being robbed of one's sense of self, all of the things that have interrupted us economically, socially, on every level. And what this summit aims at doing is changing that all. In what we are doing here, it's not a talking summit, it is a doing summit. It is centered in we and not in I. It is centered in us collectively coming together, no matter how we were dispersed, but coming together and building the future that our ancestors knew and expect for us to build.
That reparations are not only about what was taken, but about what of our Africanness must be reclaimed, restored, and revived. On this journey, we are fueled by the spirit of urgency that Kwame Nkrumah envisioned, an urgency for unity and liberation. An urgency that will guide Africans and people of African descent worldwide on a journey toward justice, dignity, unity, and a future built firmly on healing. Join us.
Hummed at dawn. Grandfathers spoke to fire, no fear, divine and true carried in breath. Oh, waters hear us, oh, wind carry us. We speak to each other, wounds loosen, we heal forward, not backward. Sea remembers our names, mountains keep secrets. When we gather, ancestors sit. Fire for survival, not pain. It cooks, warms, guards night. Water for growth, feeds root, washes yesterday from skin. We drum till sorrow sweats out. We sing till shame loses grip. We call sister, brother, till the word feels whole. Heal forward, step by step, drum by drum. Wind speaks, water listens. We rise the way we know how.